The stars had always been open to Earth. For decades, humans had built ships, sent traders, and joined the galactic markets. Goods moved freely, voices traveled across light years, and people believed they were part of something bigger than themselves. But one morning, the gates closed. The star lanes that once shimmered with light went dark. Communication relays fell silent. Ships that tried to leave orbit found the gates dead, like locked doors in space. Humanity, once connected to thousands of worlds, was suddenly trapped inside its own small system. At first, people thought it was a mistake. Scientists checked their instruments. Engineers sent signals again and again. Pilots circled the gates, waiting for them to reopen. Days passed, then weeks. Nothing changed. The silence began to spread fear. Farmers who exported crops to alien colonies had no buyers anymore. Miners who sent metals off-world now had piles of useless ore. Traders who had grown rich on galactic business suddenly had nothing but empty warehouses. Governments across Earth called emergency meetings. They sent diplomatic signals into the void, hoping the Galactic Council would respond. But the Council, the very body that Earth had once trusted, said nothing. No explanation, no warning, only silence. In the cities, people gathered in front of giant screens, waiting for news. Politicians promised answers, but their voices sounded thin and uncertain. Slowly, the truth began to take hold. Earth was cut off, deliberately and completely. The silence did not just affect trade. Medicine supplies that came from alien factories began to run out. Hospitals faced shortages of life-saving drugs. Children who needed treatments suddenly had nothing. Factories that depended on off-world materials shut down. Lights flickered out in homes as power grids strained under shortages. People waited in long lines for food, water, and fuel. The hope that it was only temporary faded with each passing day. But even as despair grew, something else began to burn inside the human heart. Fear turned into anger. Questions whispered in crowded streets. Why? Why had they been abandoned? Why had they been locked away from the galaxy they had worked so hard to join? Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said humans were being punished. Others believed a secret vote in the council had condemned Earth. And then, the darkest whisper of all. Maybe the aliens feared something humans had done, or something they could do. In small villages and massive cities alike, life began to change. Families who once dreamed of traveling among the stars now clung together, trying to survive day by day. Farmers turned their fields inward, feeding only local mouths. Old industries restarted, even if they were inefficient compared to alien technology. Humans dug into the ground, searching for their own resources again. It felt like stepping back in time, as if the entire planet had been pushed into isolation. Yet in that forced isolation, a kind of unity began to grow. Earth's nations, which had argued for centuries, realized they faced the same threat. Borders still existed, but they mattered less. Food was shared, resources pooled, and scientists from rival countries worked together. People began to remember something that had been forgotten during the years of plenty. Humanity's strength had always come from enduring hardship. Still, the silence pressed on minds like a heavy weight. Nights were restless, filled with fear of the unknown. Parents whispered to their children, promising a brighter tomorrow, even if they themselves did not believe it. Soldiers on orbital defense platforms stared out at the empty sky, waiting for an attack that never came. The emptiness of the stars was worse than war. It was a reminder that Earth had been judged, abandoned, and sealed away. One evening in a hidden control room beneath a mountain, a group of leaders sat around a dimly lit table. Their faces were pale, their eyes tired. They had waited long enough. One of them, an old general, placed his hand on the table and spoke the words others were afraid to say. "We are alone. The galaxy has left us to die." No one argued. Everyone already knew. What they did not know yet was what humanity would do next. Across Earth, stories began to surface about something buried deep in human history. A project whispered about but never confirmed. A creation so dangerous it had been sealed away. People did not know if it was real, but the thought of it spread like a spark. Perhaps the aliens feared humanity not because of what they were, but because of what they had built long ago. In the streets, people clung to hope that someone, somewhere, would answer their cries. But in the hidden places of power, men and women began to prepare for another path. The Great Silence had shown the truth. The galaxy wanted Earth forgotten, weak, and broken. But Earth was not dead yet. Humanity, though trapped, still had teeth. And deep under stone and ice, something waited to be awakened. The Great Silence became more than just the absence of voices. It became the fire that would shape the future. Families held tighter, soldiers trained harder, scientists worked longer. From the broken heart of despair came the first beat of defiance. The galaxy thought Earth would wither in silence. Instead, Earth began to listen to its own voice. And that voice was growing stronger, louder, waiting for the day it would roar. Whispers traveled faster than light, even when the gates were closed. Traders who had once called Earth a partner now sent secret messages through smugglers, and those messages carried poison. They spoke of a vote in the council chambers, of alien delegates standing in fear, not anger. The words repeated in every dark corner. Humans were too dangerous to be left free. Some said humanity had created a weapon, something terrible, something even the oldest species dared not face. Others swore they had seen hidden records, images of a machine so large it dwarfed fleets. No one knew the truth, but the rumors spread until they became more real than facts. In crowded markets, people leaned close and whispered to each other. They said Earth's leaders had lied, that humanity had built something monstrous in secret. In underground bars, ex-soldiers told stories of projects that vanished without explanation, files locked away under classified stamps. Even children repeated the tales in their games, pretending to pilot invisible giants against invisible enemies. Fear twisted into curiosity, and curiosity grew into dread. Alien envoys who had once visited Earth no longer appeared, but their silence said more than their words ever could. A single trader ship, risking death, slipped past the blockade and delivered a message carved into steel. The Council believes your kind will awaken what you buried. No name, no signature, just a warning heavy enough to crush a heart. Leaders met again, this time not in public halls, but in bunkers carved into rock. They spread maps across dusty tables and spoke in voices stripped of hope. One of them finally asked the question that had been pressing on every tongue. If the Council fears us so much, perhaps they know something we have forgotten. The others stared, but no one laughed. Deep in their eyes, the truth flickered. They remembered the old project. It had been called many things over the years. Some engineers had named it the Last Defense, others called it the Silent Giant. But one name endured in the shadows, a name that carried both terror and reverence, the God of War. It was said to have been built when Earth first joined the stars, in a time when no one trusted each other. Too dangerous to use, too powerful to destroy, it had been sealed away, its existence erased from public memory. Only a few fragments remained, locked in files that even presidents could not open. Now, as Earth struggled in silence, those fragments resurfaced. A half-burned blueprint found in a forgotten archive. A technician's diary speaking of waking the giant. A survivor from the original program, old and broken, whispering on his deathbed that the weapon was not only real, it was waiting. The whispers no longer belonged only to fearful citizens. They crept into the minds of leaders, scientists, and generals. The question was no longer whether the God of War existed, but whether humanity had the courage or the desperation to bring it back to life. Every rumor, every story, every secret carried the same message. The Council had blocked Earth not out of hate, but out of fear. And that fear was not of who humans were today, but of what they might unleash tomorrow. The days dragged into months, and the silence became unbearable. Markets that once overflowed with alien goods now stood empty, shelves lined with dust instead of food. Hospitals turned into places of sorrow, where doctors whispered apologies because medicine no longer arrived from the stars. Mothers held children close as fevers burned through fragile bodies, their cries echoing in dark hallways. In the cities, anger boiled. Crowds filled the streets, shouting at leaders who had no answers, breaking windows of buildings that could no longer provide work. Smoke rose from riots, a reminder that despair was eating Earth from within. Yet in the shadows, a different kind of fire burned. Deep underground, where the air was stale and the lights dim, leaders and generals gathered in secret. Their suits were wrinkled, their eyes sunken, but their voices carried weight. Around them lay stacks of old papers and flashing screens with broken code. They spoke not of treaties or diplomacy, but of survival. One of them pulled out a metal case and placed it on the table. Inside were fragments, half-decayed files, encrypted designs, and words written decades ago. Everyone stared, knowing what it meant without saying it aloud. Engineers were brought in, their faces pale as they studied the files. They recognized patterns, systems far beyond anything currently in use. They whispered about power sources that could last centuries, about weapons that could shatter fleets with a single strike. These were not dreams. They were blueprints for something real, something built and buried long ago. The name no one wanted to speak finally broke from one mouth like a confession. The God of War. The room fell silent, the weight of those words pressing down like stone. Outside, life grew harsher by the day. Children dug through rubble for scraps, farmers bartered for seeds that would never be enough, and soldiers stood guard over warehouses that held almost nothing. But the whispers spread again, this time among workers and technicians who were quietly moved to hidden facilities. Trucks rolled through the night, carrying metal parts covered with tarps, escorted by silent convoys. Families began to notice their fathers, mothers, brothers, and sisters vanishing into secret work. They did not ask where. They only prayed it was for something greater than hunger. Rumors of the project leaked into the streets like smoke through cracks. Some thought it was madness. Reviving an ancient monster would only make the galaxy crush Earth faster. Others clung to it like the last thread of hope. Perhaps if the God of War truly existed, humanity could rise again. People huddled around fires in ruined neighborhoods, telling each other the same story. Yeah, Earth might be starving, broken, and forgotten, but it was not finished. In the silence of the stars, despair and hope clashed in every heart. Earth had been pushed into a corner, left with nothing but memories of what once was. But in that corner where desperation lived, something old was stirring. The whispers had become a promise. If humanity could not survive in peace, then it would survive in fire. Beneath the frozen peaks of the Himalayas, deep tunnels led to chambers that had not been opened in generations. Dust lay thick on consoles, steel doors sealed with codes long forgotten by most of the world. Soldiers carrying rifles stood guard as engineers in worn uniforms pressed trembling hands to ancient panels. The air smelled of rust and oil, as if the mountain itself remembered what slept inside it. Lights that had been dead for decades flickered faintly, awakening like eyes half closed in a dream. Voices echoed through the chamber as men and women worked feverishly, connecting cables, rewiring circuits, and breathing life into machines older than their grandparents. Alarms wailed at first start, red lights flashing across the cavern walls, then subsided into a steady hum. Generators roared, shaking the ground. The silence of centuries cracked, replaced by the sound of something vast and living beneath stone. The first sight of it silenced even the boldest voices. A shape lay hidden in the shadows, so massive that the walls seemed too small to contain it. Armor plates, black as night, marked with strange patterns of ancient design, curved like the skin of a beast forged in fire. Power conduits, as wide as rivers, pulsed with light that grew brighter with every second. The air trembled as the colossal heart of the machine began to beat again. Technicians shouted readings, their voices unsteady. The energy output was beyond anything Earth's current systems could measure. It was as if the machine drew its strength from the mountain itself, from the bones of the world. Symbols etched into its hull glowed faintly, reminders of the minds that had built it in fear of a day like this. At the front of the chamber, a panel hissed open, revealing a vast cockpit that looked more like a throne room than a command station. Seats and controls built not for comfort but for absolute control, stretched before a glass view that showed only darkness. The generals who had waited for this moment stood frozen, their breath caught in their throats. No one had believed they would live to see the God of War awake. The ground shook as the machine's engines roared for the first time in half a century. Dust and stone rained from the cavern roof. Outside, shepherds in distant valleys felt the earth tremble and looked up at the mountains in fear. In the cities far below, lights flickered as power surged toward the hidden colossus. Inside the chamber, silence fell once more, broken only by the slow, deep sound of metal shifting. Two enormous eyes lit up in the darkness, burning like suns trapped within steel. For the first time since its creation, the God of War looked upon the world it had been made to defend. The old legends had been true. Humanity had not been abandoned by its ancestors. They had left behind a weapon, a guardian too terrible to use in peace, but too powerful to ignore in war. The engineers stared, trembling with awe and fear, knowing that they had not simply awakened a machine. They had unleashed something that was never meant to sleep forever. The world outside still starved, still suffered in silence. But now, in the heart of the mountains, humanity's answer had opened its eyes. Above Earth's orbit, the blockade tightened. Alien warships hung like predators, their sleek hulls reflecting the pale light of the sun. They watched the planet below as if waiting for it to beg. Commanders on those ships laughed quietly, calling humans fragile, calling Earth finished. To them, the silence meant victory. They did not know what was stirring beneath the clouds. Then the sky split. From the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas, fire erupted. A roar of engines, unlike anything the galaxy had ever heard, thundered across the skies. Birds scattered, mountains quaked, and the clouds tore apart as a shadow rose higher and higher. At first, it seemed impossible that such a thing could fly, a structure so immense it looked carved from the planet itself. But it rose with steady grace, metal glowing with the heat of rebirth. The alien fleets panicked, sensors screaming. The god of war broke free from Earth's atmosphere, its armored skin blazing with light, its engines like burning stars. It dwarfed their ships, a single human creation larger than entire enemy squadrons. Communication channels burst with frantic voices as commanders tried to comprehend what they were seeing. But before any strategy could form, the weapon fired. A single beam of light cut across the void, silent and pure. It struck the nearest alien flagship, and in an instant, the vessel dissolved into shards of fire. No wreckage remained large enough to recognize, only drifting sparks, the ashes of arrogance. The rest of the blockade froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Alien warships turned and fired every weapon they had, beams and missiles streaking toward the human giant. Explosions lit the dark sky, but the god of war absorbed them, its shields flaring like a second sun. Where the attacks landed, the air boiled, but the machine endured, unshaken, unbroken. And then it struck again, tearing through enemy lines as if swatting flies. From Earth's surface, billions of eyes lifted to the heavens. Screens lit up in homes, streets, and bunkers as the battle unfolded. Children cheered, parents wept, soldiers saluted in silence. For the first time since the gates closed, humanity felt something stronger than despair. They felt pride. In the alien fleet, panic turned to terror. Ships broke formation, some fleeing, others firing blindly. Entire crews begged their commanders to retreat, their voices cracking with fear. They had come expecting a starving, dying world. Instead, they faced a weapon that should not exist, a god clad in steel, and it was angry. The god of war advanced through the blockade, each step forward marked by destruction. It did not rush. It did not hesitate. It moved with the certainty of something built for this exact moment. Each strike deliberate, each attack final. Within minutes, the once proud alien blockade was nothing more than burning wreckage scattered across the orbit of Earth. When silence returned, it was no longer the silence of despair. It was the silence of fear, the galaxy's fear. Those who watched from afar understood what had happened. Earth had not died in the darkness. Earth had awakened, and the weapon they had tried to bury beneath myths now stood alive, guarding its people with fire. The message of destruction traveled faster than any courier ship. Entire star systems shivered when the news arrived. The human blockade had not only failed, it had been obliterated in minutes. Words spread through crowded alien marketplaces, across Grand Council chambers, through smoky dens of smugglers. The story changed with every retelling, but one truth remained. Earth had unleashed the forbidden. They called it a monster, a relic, a god. No one agreed on what it truly was like, but all agreed on one thing. It had the power to turn fleets into dust. In the Galactic Council, silence filled the chamber where leaders of countless species gathered. Their faces, scaled, furred, and strange, reflected a rare unity, fear. One delegate hissed that the humans had lied to everyone, that they had always hidden this thing in their soil. Another argued that such a machine could not be the work of Earth alone, that perhaps humanity had unearthed something older than the stars. The truth mattered less than the panic it caused. For the first time in centuries, the Council felt powerless. Merchants pulled their ships from human space, afraid of being linked to the world now seen as cursed. Colonies that once bought food and art from Earth destroyed their contracts overnight. Soldiers whispered that if one god of war existed, there might be more buried beneath Earth's mountains, oceans, and deserts. Rumors painted humans not as victims, but as sleeping titans who had finally decided to stand. On Earth, the people who had starved and rioted now stood tall again. Screens across every city replayed the same moment, the beam of fire cutting an alien flagship in half. Children in the streets mimicked it with sticks, shouting victory cries. Old veterans, once ignored, were now honored as the people's protectors. Even the broken and hungry felt pride, because their planet had shown the galaxy it was not prey. The Council sent messages demanding that Earth surrender the weapon. They cloaked their words in diplomacy, calling for peace, safety, and cooperation. But beneath the polished tones was trembling fear. Earth responded with silence, no apology, no explanation, no negotiation. Only the image of the god of war, orbiting above the planet, glowing like an iron guardian. That silence was louder than any declaration. Across the stars, whispers became nightmares. Entire fleets doubled their patrols. Generals spoke of the human threat in meetings that ended with their voices breaking. Some species considered abandoning the council altogether, unwilling to be dragged into a war against something unstoppable. In the darkest corners of the galaxy, where mercenaries and warlords ruled, the legend grew even faster. To them, humanity's act was not fearsome, but inspiring. They saw strength where others saw madness. Songs were written, secret oaths sworn, and for the first time in generations, the Council felt its authority slipping. The galaxy had tried to silence Earth. Now it was Earth's silence that terrified them most. They came like a storm. Every race that sat in the Council sent ships, a tide of steel and fire stretching across the void. Thousands of warships, each carrying the pride of its people, gathered as one armada. Never before had so many banners flown under a single command. Their leaders promised it would be swift, that humanity would finally be crushed under the weight of the galaxy. Soldiers cheered, but their eyes betrayed unease. Deep down, they remembered the stories of the blockade, the burning wreckage, and the machine that had risen from Earth like a living nightmare. The Armada descended upon the Sol system. Planets trembled as their shadows swept across the stars. Jupiter's storms glowed red under the light of war engines. Saturn's rings split as fleets cut through them. In the silence of space, an entire civilization's judgment prepared to fall on one small blue world. Then the darkness lit up. From Earth's orbit, the god of war stood waiting, a single colossus against an ocean of enemies. Its armor gleamed like a shard of night, its engines humming with the power of a world's defiance. Inside, pilots and commanders sat in silence, their hearts pounding with the weight of history. They did not fight for conquest. They fought for breath, for children waiting in ruined cities, for the right to exist when the galaxy demanded their extinction. The first wave struck. Alien beams cut through the void. Missiles streaked like fire across the heavens. The god of war answered not with panic, but with precision. Shields flared, weapons roared, and one by one, enemy ships shattered. Where the Colossus turned its gaze, entire squadrons ceased to exist. But the battle was no simple slaughter. The Armada pressed hard, their combined firepower shaking even the giant's bones. Sparks flew across consoles, alarms screamed, and pilots bled as controls burned under their hands. Still, no one faltered. Voices rang through the machine. Hold the line. For Earth. For humanity. Hours stretched into eternity. The Sol system became a graveyard of burning wreckage, fragments of ships falling like dying stars into the void. Yet still the fleets came, throwing themselves into the storm, unwilling to admit defeat. The god of war stood unyielding, scarred but alive, in every strike a reminder that humans could not be broken. Across the galaxy, eyes watched in stunned silence. Broadcasts of the battle spread faster than light, showing the impossible. One human colossus defying the united might of countless worlds. The Council had sent their judgment, and Earth had answered with defiance, carved in fire. When the last alien ship broke and fled into the darkness, the heavens grew quiet once more. The battlefield floated with wrecks, but the god of war still stood, orbiting Earth like a guardian carved from vengeance. Humanity had faced the galaxy's full fury and had not only survived, it had endured, unbent, unbroken. The wreckage of the armada drifted silently, torn ships scattering across the void like shattered crowns. Fires still burned on twisted hulls, their light glimmering faintly before being swallowed by the endless dark. Where thousands of alien warships had once stood, only silence remained, broken by the slow hum of one colossal machine. The god of war circled Earth like a sentinel, its armor scorched, its weapons still glowing with the heat of battle, but its presence undeniable. Humanity had not only survived the storm, it had claimed the stars through defiance. Across alien worlds, fear became law. Leaders who had once mocked humans now whispered their names with trembling voices. In grand halls where declarations of dominance had echoed, silence reigned, heavy with the memory of fire. No race dared to send another fleet. None dared to blockade Earth again. The lesson had been carved in the bones of their destroyed armada. Corner a human, and you awaken something beyond reason, something that cannot be chained. On Earth, people filled the streets not in riots but in celebration. Children pointed to the skies, knowing their world was no longer trapped, no longer voiceless. Farmers, workers, and soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, united by pride that the galaxy could never take away again. The silence that had once starved them was now the silence of respect, the silence of fear that kept enemies at bay. In hidden chambers, Earth's leaders gathered, faces lit by the glow of surviving monitors. Their voices were calm, resolute. They knew the galaxy would never see them the same way again. There would be alliances forged in fear, offers wrapped in trembling words, but beneath it all, Earth had earned something more powerful than treaties: the right to exist without permission. The god of war was not dismantled. It was not sealed again in darkness. It remained above Earth, a shadow of steel and fire, a warning to the stars. Humanity had learned that trust in others could vanish, but trust in its own strength would never fail. And so the story spread across the galaxy, not as rumor, but as undeniable truth. Earth was small, yes. Fragile, yes. But when abandoned, when cornered, when silenced, humans did not surrender. They awakened gods.